dear Rosa family. Let's have a look at Niobe. Niobe is going to be entering the sign of Aries for a lot longer period of time than usual. So if you have spent the last few months trying to force a project forward, screaming to the world that you don't need anyone's help, or building an empire on pure willpower, I need you to pause this video and take a very deep breath because on May 26th, the cosmos is very much setting an elaborate cosmic trap for our collective ego. Asteroid Niobe, which astrological number is 71, if you would like to look it up where it is in your natal chart, is entering Aries, and it is about to kick off quite a brutal free pass reality check that will completely dismantle where we are lying to ourselves. For those who don't know the astronomy or the mythology behind this, Niobe represents the ultimate journey from extreme pride to absolute kind of like crushing humility. In the ancient stories, Niobe was a queen who boasted that her 14 healthy children made her superior to the gods. So she thought she was completely bulletproof. And in a single flash, the gods stripped it all away, leaving her so paralyzed by grief that she literally turned into stone. So she became a weeping rock that couldn't stop crying. So when Niobe hits Aries on May 26th, this archetype is going to live in your natal chart. It is targeting the exact area of your life where you are overextending your ego, acting untouchable, or using a mask of fake confidence to hide your deepest vulnerability. This isn't just a quick transit. This is a massive stage psychological audit that will play out over the next 10 months in the part of your Aries chart. Phase one happens from May to August. Niobe charges forward into the sign of Aries. This is where we build the illusion. We take on too much overhead, boast about our upcoming success, and push people away potentially. Then we have got phase two, which is hitting from August 1st. Niobe stations a retrograde at 11 degree of Aries. So the momentum stops somehow. The cracks in your armor start to kind of show a little bit. And then the phase three is kind of like the kicker here. On October 6th, Niobe slides backward out of Aries and plunges back into the deep emotional waters of Pisces. But here is the good news. The cosmos doesn't necessarily dismantle us to punish us. It dismantles us to purify us. You know, Aries is the ultimate fire sign, and fire is about purification. So by January 1st, when Niobe re-enters Aries for the final time, the toxic, that brittle pride will be completely washed away. You will step back into your power, but this time your confidence will be a little bit quieter, more sustainable, kind of completely unshakable. So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down exactly how this raw, intense transit is going to impact your sign, the critical degrees you need to look for in your chart, and how to survive pretty much this Niobe's reckoning without burning your life to the ground. So now, let's go a lot deeper with this, right? Because we really want to be understanding this archetype completely. So let me just give you the timelines. Actually, before I give you the chronological timeline, I would like to invite you to my upcoming relocation course. This is going to be 16-week course, and what I can promise is that you are going to be walking away with so much knowledge that you will be able to determine the best possible place to live at. Now, you need astrological knowledge for this. You need to be able to interpret a chart. You need to understand aspect sign houses, as well as planetary meanings. And the rest is going to be all taught in the course for you. You have got two options. You can just buy the course itself if you wish so, or you can buy my membership program, and then other videos, 250 courses and webinars will be available for you during 1 year period. So check it out on my website, AstroViktor.com, and you can really find the entire syllabus of this relocation course. But let's do a bit of a summary here. So May 26th, Niobe enters Aries. Uh, on August 1st, Niobe moves forward. Until August 1st, Niobe is going to be moving forward through the sign of Aries. So it's going to be hitting quite a peak momentum there. But August 1st, Niobe stations retrograde at 11 degree of Aries. So that's one of the sensitive degrees there. Do you have any planet on 11 degree of the cardinal sign? Then in phase two, we are going to be a retrograde motion. So we are going to be doing a lot of reconsideration. The retrogression happens between August 1st to October 6th, really, in the sign of Aries. But October 6th, Niobe slips backwards out of Aries and then re-enters the sign of Pisces. Between October 6th to November 17th, Niobe retreats through the final degrees of Pisces. So the retrogression ends around 24 degree of Pisces. And on November 17th, Niobe stations direct, like I said, on 24 degree, ending its retrograde cycle. And then until January 1st, it's going to be in the sign of Pisces. But on January 1st, Niobe re-enters Aries for the final time. And it's going to remain there up until April 6th. And this is when Niobe is going to be leaving the sign of Aries and enters Taurus. So Niobe represents overwhelming pride in something that you create or in your status, and which can lead to kind of like a stark lesson, really, in humility as well as losses. So, in a very practical psychological context, this transit represents where we overextend our ego, where we refuse to see our vulnerability, where we must learn to let go of control. Because this transit is going to be spanning the boundary between Pisces, which is the collective emotions, endings, and dissolution, and Aries, which is the individual identity, ambition, new beginnings. So this specific cycle is about tearing down false confidence to build more of an authentic resilience, really. So let's look at the phases here one by one. So phase one, May 26th to August 1st. You might be launching a new business or take a major leadership role at work. You might feel invincible, taking on too much overhead, boast about your upcoming success. Then we have got phase two, which is August 1st to October 6th. The market is shifting. Clients push back. You realize your initial strategy was built on an ego rather than a concrete infrastructure. As Niobe dips back into Pisces, which is October 6th to November 17th, you hit a moment of reckoning. You have to grieve the perfect vision you had, admit you need help, and kind of quietly try to fix kind of like the back-end errors. And then phase three is when, with the lessons learned, you rebuild that business. And when Niobe re-enters the sign of Aries on January 1st, you launch again. But this time your confidence is more grounded in hard work, not just the hype or kind of like the passion that Aries might be giving you. Or we can look at it from a relationship dynamic point of view as well. So in phase one, you might be entering a relationship where you declare, I don't need anyone, I'm doing this my way, I'm highly independent, maybe also quite aggressive when it comes to achieving goals. But in phase two, the retrogression is going to force you to look at the collateral damage of that attitude. And when Niobe retreats into Pisces, kind of like an emotional wave could be hitting there, you realize that that fierce independence was actually just a fear of vulnerability. And then you face that lonely reality of pushing people away might not have been the best course of action. And in phase three, we integrate it. You learn how to be a strong individual without completely shutting people out of your life, shutting out those emotional connections. And therefore, you start building up better understanding of how human behavior works. So the key degrees to watch is somewhere between 24 to 29 degree Pisces. This area is going to get hit, of course, well, 3 times as well, because the shadow period already started. And then, of course, somewhere between 0 to 11 degree of Aries. That's going to be pretty much the hot zone there. Something that you initiate here in June or July will be thoroughly tested, audited, refined between somewhere August and December onwards. Now, let's start with what Niobe represents a lot more in depth. So, Niobe's primary flaw wasn't just arrogance, it was pride based on what she produced. 14 beautiful children, really. Rather than who she actually was, she argued that she was superior to the goddess Leto, who only had 2 children. Leto's children were Apollo and Artemis. So Niobe represents where we tie 100% of our self-worth to our attachments, creations, the status symbols. So imagine this a parent whose entire identity is wrapped up in their children's achievements. It's a mom, for example, who is super proud of what the children achieved. But we also need to be proud of what we have achieved as well. Or imagine a entrepreneur who treats their businesses like their own baby, believing a failure in the business means they are a failure as a human as well. Or we have got the creative who believe their worth dictates whether their latest project goes viral or kind of it flops. So the lesson of Niobe is wherever it is going to be in your natal chart, look at what I made, look at what I own, look at what I achieved. And this can make you feel like you are untouchable. Now, there is the vulnerability of the ego that we might want to be building about. The ego, the pride is often built on external, kind of like moving parts, really. But the ego is incredibly fragile. So in the myth, Apollo and Artemis take away everything she boasted about in an instant. So Niobe represents the ultimate vulnerability. It is the specific area of life where we try to act completely bulletproof to hide our deepest fear of powerlessness. So, firstly, I would like to ask where Niobe is in your natal chart. I would love to hear about whether you feel like you are kind of like vulnerable in that part of your chart and how ego might have come in the way, during the years you have actually experienced. Now, Niobe, for example, in my natal chart is in the sixth house. So it could indicate that I'm extremely proud, for example, of my weight loss journey or the healthy lifestyle that I live. But Niobe somehow represents that at one point we are always going to be kind of kicked in the butts. Niobe is actually very tightly opposing the ruler of my sixth house as well. So even this could indicate that the ego there, the vulnerability of the ego, if someone is kind of like attacking me, for example, connected to my physical body and so forth, then I take it too hard. That's the Leo element there. Because Niobe represents that ultimate vulnerability. So wherever it is, it shows that your physical body, for example, in the sixth house, is super vulnerable. So it is also something that we tend to overcompensate with. The louder we boast or try to control things in the Niobe area of our life, the more terrified we actually are of losing control. Niobe is about loss and grief as well. She lost her children. She was overwhelmed by grief that she turned to stones, weeping continuously. So Niobe can represent grief that paralyzes us. It shows up during transits when an ego structure we build is kind of like dismantled. It represents something painful, numbing phase of loss. So we can start doing things that is out of our element because we want to numb the pain. And then we kind of become frozen, rigid, or unable to move forward because we are mourning a version of reality that actually no longer exists. The lesson, because turning to stone is very much of a defense mechanism. So Niobe shows where we harden our hearts to shut down emotionally when things don't go our way, rather than processing the pain, cleanly. When it comes to grief, there are 5 stages, which I have spoken about in previous videos. I don't want to repeat myself so much. But we have got the denial stage, we've got the processing stage, we've got the different stages. So Niobe for me is the representation of an extended version of that grieving period. Ultimate purpose of Niobe is not necessarily punishment. It's about purification. Once that false pride and the subsequent emotional paralysis clear, what is left there is super authentic. It's a very unshakable foundation there. So, that ego-driven confidence to a deeply grounded soul-level resilience, that's what we need to be able to achieve in that particular part of your chart. So, for example, if you have got Niobe in the 10th house, the false pride is very much about the title that we've got, the reputation, the career status can be defining our value. But the ultimate reality check, the lesson with that is a public critique that forces a separation of self from job. So now, who was she in mythology? Let's talk a little bit more about that. She was the queen of Thebes, and she was married to a king. She was a woman of high noble birth. She was the daughter of Tantalus, a king famously punished by Zeus, by the way, and the sisters of Pelops. So while she was wealthy and powerful, her ultimate source of pride was her family. She had 14 children, seven sons and seven daughters, by the way, and they are collectively known as the Niobids. And her story is actually one of the most famous Greek myths about hubris, which is the extreme pride, really, and that severe retaliation of the gods. So during an annual festival in Thebes, held to honor the goddess Leto. Leto is the mother of the divine twins Apollo and Artemis. Niobe grew arrogant. Looking at the women of Thebes worshipping Leto, Niobe publicly interrupted that ritual, and she boasted that she was far more deserving of worship than Leto. And purely her logic was based on numbers. Like Leto had only two children, Niobe had 14, right? Niobe also pointed out her own royal wealth and beauty, claiming she was superior to the goddess, who had once wandered the earth as a fugitive. So she ordered her citizens to tear off their laurel wreath and stop sacrificing to Leto. Leto called upon her twins, Apollo and Artemis, to defend her honor. Apollo targeted the seven sons with a golden arrow, killing them one by one, while they were hunting and practicing athletics, basically. And hearing the news, the king killed himself in despair. So despite the horror, Niobe's pride didn't fully break. She shielded her daughters and screamed at Leto, "You have only two, I still have seven." That's when Artemis stepped in, shooting the seven daughters with her silver arrows. According to some version of the myth, Niobe begged for the life of her youngest, smallest daughter, but it was too late. All 14 children were killed. That's when she went into that grieving mode. And she was kind of like left alone on the battlefield, surrounded by the bodies of her husband and her children. So that grief and trauma were so absolute that she was paralyzed. She could no longer speak, move, eat, talk, and so forth. She went under this, I mean, seeing her in an utter devastated mode, Zeus actually took pity on her emotional paralysis and transformed her into stone to end her kind of like physical suffering. And she was carried away as a form of stone or statue to Mount Cephalus. It's in modern days, it's somewhere in Turkey, and that became Niobe's homeland. But of course, think about what happens to a stone, right? Rainwater, natural spring, seep through the stone, channeling down the front of that cliffside. So to the ancient Greeks, it looked like the rock formation itself was kind of like weeping all the time. So the psychological core of this is overextension, especially in the sign of Aries, um, feeling untouchable, aggressive, feeling like a superiority. And then the paralysis is happening in the retrograde motion when the external structure is kind of like taken away from us. And then the third one is the eternal spring for me, which is actually the direct motion in the sign of Pisces. That weeping rock doesn't stop crying, but it turns the grief into a permanent natural element of the landscape. So now let's just look at that Aries. So firstly, the mask of invincibility that I would potentially mention there. Aries is the pioneer, the warrior, the I am type of archetype. So when Niobe enters Aries, it's a very fierce, aggressive, highly independent flavor that it receives. And maybe I want to be proving my self-sufficiency. I can do this on my own. I don't need anyone's help, support, validation. Look at what I'm building through my own willpower. But there is a pitfall with that, right? The confidence is very brittle. It's an overcompensation. The ego starts swelling, and we might aggressively push past boundaries, dominate conversations, boast about how independent we are. So we are building a castle based on the illusion that we are entirely bulletproof. And, Niobe is going to be pushing as far as she can into Aries before stationing retrograde. So that's pretty much the peak of expansion there. And the ego structure is fully extended. It cannot go any further without a reality check. What's very interesting is that Niobe is not going to reach Saturn. Saturn is going to be in that particular chart on 14 degree of Aries retrograde. So meaning that because it's within 3 degree of Saturn, that's also the representation of a reality check as well. So now Niobe is going to station retrograde before hitting Saturn. So it's a halting moment, right? So we start turning that energy inwards. So the things that we launched or asserted, it starts showing certain type of structural flaws. So that invincible warrior is forced to retreat. Kind of like the world, the external world, the environment stops cooperating with our demands. Until then, it might work really well. So instead of the I don't need anyone, this is where, okay, we're stepping down, we're stepping backwards a little bit. And then maybe no one is going to be offering the help anymore. And then, yes, we are entirely alone to handle, for example, a heavy workload. So it feels like, you are fighting against the waves, really. The Aries side of us wants to push harder, fight back, force a victory. But Niobe's retrograde makes forcing things completely impossible. It feels like that we keep hitting a wall there. And then we are moving back into the sign of Pisces. And the psychological state there is that the armor of that ego is completely stripped away. Pisces represents the collective unconsciousness, the grief, the surrender, the dissolution of the ego. So that fierce, independent identity we try to project starts to melt away. This is when Niobe turned to stone on the battlefield. That anger, that fighting spirit of Aries runs out of fuel. And then you realize that there is no point in pushing any harder. It's the realization that we cannot control everything. So this is a bit of an emotional paralysis here, deep vulnerability, a bit of a burnout as well. But it also reminds us that we cannot run away from our feelings. It demands absolute surrender. So the lesson here is that you are not an island, you cannot control the universe through your own willpower. It is okay to cry, it is okay to weep, it is okay to let go, it is okay to admit that we feel powerless. And then the re-entry into the sign of Aries, which is happening around November 17th until April 6th, that's a new reality. So this is not a repeat of the summer. You are crossing the same degrees, but you are a completely different person. That defensive ego pride of Aries has been dissolved by the Piscean waters, and maybe you are able to make better, genuine connections with others. The desire to lead, to create, and to be independent is still there, but somehow the ego is dissolved. So the outcome could be is that you become a true warrior who operates with deep empathy, spiritual awareness, emotional intelligence. You are not building things to prove your superiority to the world. You are building something because you want to be expressing the authentic um, self, the internal strength that you have kind of like built on. So that's pretty much Niobe. Now, one other thing that actually I wanted to kind of like show or I'm not talk to you about, but I wanted to give you a date actually. And I forgot to check that. But when is Niobe going to be running into um, Saturn? So that's what I wanted to tell you about. So let me just check that up for you. So Niobe, it's going to be happening in potentially January. And that's going to be actually an interesting conjunction. The reason why it's super interesting because Niobe and Saturn are going to be meeting up on 11 degree of Aries. That's exactly happening right here. So that's going to be happening 10th of February. And it's on 11 degrees. That was the stationary degree of Niobe. So it clearly shows that whatever you are trying to build, for example, in that particular part of your chart, maybe the fruition of that is just going to be coming from February onwards. But let's have a look at the 12 signs very briefly, what it might mean. So obviously, it's going to be happening in Aries rising sign. It's going to be happening in your first and 12th house, which is your personal identity appearance, that independent drive is going to get audited this year. So from May to August, you feel that urge to prove you can do everything entirely on your own. But when the retrograde begins, that exhausting weight of carrying everything on your shoulders starts to crack a little bit, cracking your armor. And then Niobe slips back into Pisces, and you face an emotional reckoning regarding your vulnerability or hidden insecurities. You realize that you have to still work something through. So that's going to remind you to surrender, requiring you to lay down your defense mechanism and admit that you need support. And by January 1st, you step back into that power, but with more of a grounded, authentic confidence. And we don't have to shout to be heard. Taurus rising sign, this is happening in your 12th and 11th house. So this is looking at your subconscious patterns, your hidden motives, your solitary habits, really. So the early summer pulls you into a highly private phase where you might feel that you have to be working on enlightenment or self-sufficiency. But the retrograde forces you to realize that isolating yourself isn't necessarily a strength. It's a defense mechanism against being seen. Because it feels like that you have got this, fear of being on the public stage. But when Niobe backs into Pisces, the focus shifts to your social circles, revealing where false pride has alienated you from your community. You are forced to let go of the need to look socially superior or emotionally detached from others. So by next spring, your inner world is cleared of toxic ego, allowing you to reconnect with groups from a place of humility. So it feels like that it's about making better connections. It could be also that you are going to be detaching yourself from certain type of long-term goals that you have to admit that it is not working for you. Gemini risings, and this is happening in your 11th and 10th house. So the 11th house is networks, friendship, long-term aspirations, and it feels like that it undergoes a structural alignment, Maybe you start the summer feeling incredibly influential, boasting about your connections, feeling proud of, in a way, what you have achieved or what type of goals that you've got. You can put a lot of passion in there. But then this retrograde is going to be quickly checking the pride behind it. And then it could be bringing sudden frictions with people, misunderstanding, the lack of support from peers and friends. As Niobe slips back into Pisces, the reality check hits your professional life, your career standing. Maybe you are forced to mourn a specific title or public image you wrapped up your identity around. But once you surrender the need for that external applause, maybe you return to your networks in January, ready to lead with genuine purpose, or potentially maybe this is something to do with the financial part of the business that you are part of, and we might be seeing some declinations there, and then you're going to have to revisit the basics of that enterprise so that it can become again profitable. Cancer rising sign, this is happening in your 10th and ninth house. So the 10th house is your career, public reputation, professional ambitions. That's going to become quite a focal point in this cycle. In the first phase, you pour massive energy into a public milestone, feeling entirely untouchable in your professional authority. But this might be bringing you some administrative delays, public critiques, the bosses who might be kind of criticizing the work that you do, or maybe a sudden pause to your career trajectory. So when Niobe retreats back into Pisces, that core belief, your philosophies, your long-term visions are thoroughly dismantled. So you are forced to admit where a rigid worldview or intellectual pride blinded you to the necessary truth. So you start seeing the truth connected to the job that you do or the journey that you are in. And then, of course, Niobe will re-enter your professional arena, and it's more refined, redefined, more flexible. We have got a more sustainable approach to success. Leo rising sign, this is triggering your ninth and eighth house. And is going to be challenging your belief systems, your education, your absolute certainty about things as well, like how the world works. So you have got an intellectual pride at the beginning of that, making you fiercely dogmatic about your opinions or plans or visions. But retrograde introduces experiences that somehow going to be contradicting your opinion, your theories, and it's going to force you in a way to question your ultimate direction in life. So as Niobe backs into Pisces, this is going to cut deep, this transit cuts deep into your eighth house, the house of shared resources, intimacy, the psychological shadows. So you must kind of like face some messy emotional realities, financial dependencies, power struggles. You try to intellectualize away somehow, but you are emerging from this, and then your wisdom is going to become not so theoretical, but it's going to be embodied. Virgo rising sign, this is triggering your eighth and seventh house. So, eighth house is psychological transformation, intimacy, joy and finances, what you try to control, really. So, you enter this summer trying to dominate financial agreements, pretending you are completely unbothered by deep emotional attachments. Uh, you don't care about being single, for example. But the retrograde is going to be exposing the fragility of this control, bringing blocks to shared resources, sudden emotional vulnerabilities to light. Now, Niobe is going to be shifting back into Pisces. So the mirror turns directly towards your committed partnership, one-on-one connections. And you face a reckoning regarding how your pride or emotional walls have pushed important people away from your life. And this toxic power game starts dissolving, paving the way for more of a balanced, kind of like vulnerable relationship where we are able to trust again. Libra rising sign. So this is happening in your seventh and sixth house. So committed partnership, business alliances, open contracts are completely revolutionized. The initial phase is going to bring the desire to dictate the terms of that relationship or of that contractual agreement. It's the my way or the highway type of attitude. But it gets tested by a Niobe. Bring in relational pushbacks, conflicts, sudden distance from a partner. And then Niobe moves back into the sign of Pisces, which is going to be the sixth house, the house of daily routines, health, and work environment. So you are forced to surrender that perfectionist control over your day-to-day life and face physical or and having to face a physical or mental burnout, really. But the ultimate goal of Niobe is to kind of soften your relationship department and then finding a healthier version of maintaining the boundaries within the partnership as well as not to get lost within the partnership. So it brings up the topic of healthcare. Scorpio rising sign. So this is going to be taking place in your sixth house, and then Niobe shifts back into the fifth house. And the sixth house is daily work, routines, physical health, the act of service. And this transit is going to put this department under kind of like a strict audit. So you might be starting to micromanage your schedule, pushing your body to the limit, taking immense pride in your productivity, working extra long hours as well. And I can imagine some of you might do that because obviously this is summer. But this is a reminder also that we have to be able to have fun as well at the same time. Of course, you have been trying to maintain something so badly in your life, but the retrograde is going to force you to rest a little bit. It can lead to physical fatigue, workplace inefficiencies, logistical error, for example, that you cannot force your way through. When Niobe slides backwards into Pisces, the crisis move into your house of creativity, romance, and self-expression. Imagine that you are taking the work pressure into your romantic life or into the life of your children, and that could create a bit of a conflict there. So it's a bit of an awakening moment where your ego is very tied to your creative output as well as your work at the same time or your romantic life. And we're going to have to put the performance down a little bit. We're going to have to rebuild our daily routine by January. That is going to bring you a lot more joy. Sagittarius rising sign. So this is taking place in your fifth house, then the fourth house. So the fifth house is a creative project, your romantic life, self-expression, relationship with your children, or relationship with a creative product might undergo a profound shift. Early summer brings a massive wave of creative ego where you want to be in the center stage, you want to be praised for something, maybe for your unique talents, for example. But the retrograde dims this spotlight and then bringing romantic stalls, creative blocks, something that might be kind of puncturing your enthusiasm a little bit. And Niobe shifts back into the sign of Pisces. So the transits hits the foundation of your chart, your home, your family, your emotional roots. You are forced to face old family dynamics, domestic vulnerabilities, ancestral grief that you previously potentially ran away from. Now, this period could have started for you somewhere actually a good 4 months ago. So think back from February until June, what went down in your life. But by January, you emerge from that private shell with a more secure self of yours because your internal foundation is hopefully a lot stronger, and that could lead to a lot of creativity. It could be, for example, that you have been working on a creative project, but unfortunately, you're going to have to go back to the roots of that creative project and you're going to have to rework it because it doesn't take off as you have expected. Capricorn rising sign. So this is happening in your fourth house and then the third house. So your home life, your family foundation, emotional security, the inner sanctuary are going to be reassessed in your life. You start a cycle trying to heavily control your domestic environment, acting as an invincible parent, as an invincible a member of your family. But the retrograde disrupts this control, bringing hidden household issues, family tensions to the surface that you cannot ignore anymore. And then once Niobe goes back into your third house, imagine that as you are forced to talk out your feelings, we're going to have to put down the passive aggressive nature. Obviously, Aries is very aggressive, Pisces is very passive. So we're going to have to somehow make peace with our mindset. We're going to have to learn to have better interactions, for example, with these family members, people that we live together with. You must confront your mental rigidity, the style of communication of yours and others as well. And maybe this is, when Niobe goes back into the sign of Pisces, it's also the ego is in the way of forgiveness as well. So, but by January, that internal dialogue softens completely, allowing you to rebuild a truly peaceful, kind of like secure home base, a secure foundation. Aquarius rising sign. So this is going to be taking place in your third and second house. The third house is your mind, your style of communication, learning process, daily interactions are thoroughly overhauled. So the first phase amplifies your how confident you are in your mind, how confident you are with your studies, for example. It might be making you quick to speak, to debate, to assert your ideas as absolute facts. But that retrograde period brings communication breakdowns, technical glitches, for example, instances where your words are heavily challenged. Now, as Niobe slips back into Pisces, the narrative targets your second house, the house of money, material possessions, and self-worth. So maybe you are forced to look at your verbal skills and how I can make money out of it, or you are forced to look at where you used financial stability and material items to kind of prop up a fragile ego. But by January, there is a sense of value, a sense of self-worth there. These are decoupled from your bank account, making you look wiser, your speech more humble, more impactful. Maybe you're gonna have the bravery to put yourself out there to make money in different ways. And last but not least, Pisces rising sign. So this is happening in your second house and your first house. Second house is your finances, your core values, your material security. On one hand, this is definitely about how secure you feel in your own skin. Maybe you have to be auditing what you eat, what you feed the body with, how you make your money, whether you use your talents to your bestest advantage. It might be a total identity makeover. Early summer, you might be aggressively pushing or chasing financial independence, potentially with the retrogression, the finances can stall a little bit, forcing you to look at the emotional security, hiding behind those money habits that you've got. Why do I have to spend so much money on the physical body, for example? Why do I want to be on diet all the time, and so forth? Niobe retreats into your first house in October, and that is about putting your ego aside, basically. You are forced to shed the old masks, face personal grief, and completely redefine who you are at a soul level. So by January, Niobe re-enters your financial sector and allowing you to start wealth from a place of unshakable inner security. So, guys, this is the breakdown for all 12 signs. So, this is going to be impacting you, of course, the most when those sensitive degrees that I have shared shared at the beginning of the video. If it triggers something in your natal chart, progress chart, or solar arc chart, or even in your solar return chart, then this video is definitely you. But the most important part is that you're going to have to look at where Niobe comes from. So in my case, for example, Niobe transiting the second and the first house right now, but Niobe is coming from the sixth house. So the sixth house and the second house, how can they be combined, right? The work and the money, or the health and the food that I put into my body. And that has to be reviewed. So good luck, everyone, and I will see you in my next video. Take care. Bye-bye.